of Learning Loft Education, where we specialize in English tutoring specifically for the VCE curriculum. Today is going to be the first of our series where we look at the VCAA study design, particularly for Unit 3 and 4, and we go through in what they're looking for. And in today's first episode, we are going to be looking at reading and responding to texts, also known as the text response. This comes up in both Unit 3 and in Unit 4. Let's get into it. What we're going to be covering is the difference between Year 11 and Year 12 text responses, or reading and responding to texts. We will also be looking at the actual SACs and what the task is, basically. Then we're going to look at the difference between Unit 3 and Unit 4. Is there really even a difference between the two assessment types? Then we're going to look at the skills of analysing your text and how to write an essay. And finally, we're going to look at the VCAA rubric, the rubric which you will be assessed in for the end of year exam. Now, most of you watching, will be Year 11 going into Year 12 or pretty early stages of Year 12, right? This is probably the best time to be watching that. Okay, so we're going to be briefly talking about the transition from Year 11 to Year 12 and the difference between the Unit 1-2 versions of the text response and the Unit 3-4 versions of the text response. So the key difference is that in Year 11, it is namely, we've got the personal response and a version of the text response. It is a little bit more personalized to you. You're including some of your own opinions, at least in one of them. And we're following sort of this path for it to be less personal and more analytical. This is more so where you explore texts. You're building the skills on how to sort of analyze them, understand them, and then write in response to them. Whereas in Year 12, you are expected to have a much deeper understanding of the text than you did in Year 11. You're expected to provide and have more analytical thinking and understand more of the context of the text and how that actually influences us as readers and the audience and what goes on within the text, the themes, the symbols, etc. So, Year 11 to Year 12, just think it's just a jump building on what you've already done. It's getting a little bit more complex, which is pretty self-explanatory. Now, what exactly is the task of reading and responding to texts? So let's get into it. This is what we're talking about when it comes to the SACs. So in Unit 3, Area Study 1 and Unit 4, Area Study 1, there are two assessments, one in each, both worth the same amount of marks. This is copied from VCAA. So you can see that there's a slight difference in the explanation for the task, but they're pretty much the same. We will go through that in a moment. But you are writing an analytical response to the text in written form. So what does that all really mean? In your SACs, you will be typically, as you'll come to understand, SACs vary from school to school quite, for some quite differently, in others, they're pretty relatively the same, but it depends between the schools. So in your SACs, typically you'll be writing one written response, which is a text response essay, what most people will be referring to as a text response essay. Unit 3 SAC is usually assessed with a little bit more leniency around the rules than Unit 4, okay? What this means is that typically schools will give maybe a little bit of extra time in the Unit 3 text response SAC versus what they give in Unit 4. Sometimes I have heard that in Unit 3, some schools may give a quote sheet with some limitations, and Unit 4, no quote sheet. There usually tends to be a little bit more leniency in the rules. And by the time we hit Unit 4, they're really trying to prep you for the conditions of the exam. Some schools won't do any leniency at all and they'd make it identical. That happens quite a lot as well. It varies from school to school. Unit 4 tends to be very similar to the exam conditions, right? So 1 hour reading time, 5 minutes maybe extra, but it's pretty much similar to the conditions of the exam. So I'm going to move myself over here so you guys can see this properly. This is an outline of the Unit 3, Unit 4 different outcomes, so different SACs, right? We're going to be focusing on this top one and this one here so we can understand the context of what we're looking at. So each unit is worth 100 marks. So this assessment plus this assessment would be worth 100 marks. Text response is worth 40 marks out of those 100. Therefore, Unit 3, because it's 25% of your study score, the text response SAC in both Unit 3 and Unit 4 are worth 10% of your study score overall. Hopefully that makes sense. Unit 3, each unit is worth 25% of your study score. The other 50% is coming from the exam, right? 40 marks out of 100 for Unit 3 equates to 10% of your study score. So, what is it really worth? Let's get into it. So each SAC is worth 40 marks out of the total 100 marks per unit. Each unit in English is worth 100 marks, right? Each SAC, each text response SAC in both Unit 3 and Unit 4, 40 marks. Unit 3 and Unit 4 are worth 25% of your study score. Therefore, each SAC is worth about 10% of your study score, okay? So they do count to stuff, but that's okay. It's only 10% in the grand scheme of things, okay? Each. So let's get into the difference between Unit 3 and Unit 4 text response. Is there even a difference? Well, yes, there is. We're about to get into it. Short answer, relatively the same tasks, all right? Text response in Unit 1 to Unit 4, as I was mentioning before when we were talking about the differences between Year 11 and Year 12, they are part of a progression of skills, okay? A timeline where we started with the personal response and we've gone all the way to Unit 4. Slightly more difficult, slightly more complex as we go along because there is a version of text response in each semester, each unit in VCE. So Unit 4, understandably, requires slightly more mastered skills than in Unit 3. The difference is not huge. Your school will probably not even emphasize the fact that there is a difference because it's pretty minor. You just might be looking at a text in slightly more detail compared to Unit 3. And that is where the differences will lay. However, your teachers probably won't be sitting there and saying, okay, this is exactly the different things that we're looking for in addition to what we're doing in Unit 3, unfortunately, which kind of sometimes can make students feel a little bit lost, but that's okay. We're going to go through those differences soon. So now this, we are looking at the description for the outcomes from the study design. And on the right is the very high sort of criteria from the SACs. Your schools do not necessarily need to use the rubric that is right here on the very high section. This is one that VCAA provides, but schools are encouraged to alter their SACs to their cohort and cater it to the students in the year level, right? So they may also alter the rubric. That is perfectly fine when it comes to the SACs. That is well within your school's rights, okay? So dark column, to repeat, is the description of the outcome, the SAC description essentially. Not much detail there. And the very high is from the rubric template that VCAA provides for these two SACs, okay? So let's look into the pinkish highlighted parts. These parts are the additional pieces of information that exist in Unit 4 but don't exist in Unit 3, okay? So let's go from the SAC descriptors first, okay? So in Unit 3, we've just got the ideas, concerns, and conflicts in a text. In Unit 4, we've got the explicit and implicit ideas presented in a text. What we're looking at when we hear that is the ideas that the text is relaying to us as the most obvious, the things that are pretty clear for all to see, and then the ones that are implied. Characters may not explicitly state it. They may have a situation that happens and their reaction and the level of sympathy that the author is providing that character will show us these implied ideas. It's not going to be written in giant bold letters across each page. All right, those would be the more explicit ideas. So this is a more mastered skill than what they're looking for in Unit 3. We need to be looking at the implied stuff. Then we're looking at, instead of just looking at the context of the text, so the historical context, the social and cultural values in a text, we're looking at how those things contribute to meaning and shape readers' understanding. Okay, so less about, oh, well, this is the context, this is some of the values going on, this is how it connects. All right. Instead, how do these things come together and help us understand this text more deeply? And then how are the values in a text conveyed? That is not in the previous one, in Unit 3. We're seeing a lot of how words, okay? How are these things shaping, helping us, guiding us as readers in the journey of this text? Okay, then we've got another difference, which is in the description. Okay, this is the description of the very high of the rubric. So we have, instead of examines critically the ideas and concerns and values, blah, 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 we've got examines critically ideas, concerns and values presented in the text. This addition is basically allowing room for us to discuss not only are they presented, but the ways in which they are presented. So not just the fact that they exist, how are we getting that information? How is that being relayed to us? How is that changing across the text? How is it being presented in the text, essentially? Okay, this is further down. This is further down the outcome descriptor and the very high of the equivalent outcome. Okay, so less differences in the rest of the rubric, rest of the section. Okay, so we have got, we'll start from the top. We have got in Unit 4 in the high section, you are starting to be a little bit more specific, right? They've added the word relevant to convey relevant, nuanced, and complex ideas. So this is a way that they're narrowing the scope, basically. So instead, maybe you were including stuff, yeah, accurate, sure, does connect, I see that, but now they're being like, it has to be relevant though. You may be right, but it has to be relevant to what's going on in your writing and in what you're discussing, okay? Moving down, we are now adding in a little bit more specificity again. In a critical consideration of the topic and its implications. The implications, they absolutely love the implications, all right? So this is when we're talking about your ability to respond to a topic. So you are considering the topic, you're considering the question and the prompt that you've been given, and you're considering what it implies about the text, okay? Multiple implications about the text. They're a little bit more lenient on that in Unit 3. They're sort of just asking you to respond, consider it critically, and respond. In this case, consider it critically, and let's include some implications, all right? And then there's one more addition in Unit 3 versus Unit 4. This one's a bit hard to sort of explain because this is more specific in Unit 3 than Unit 4. Is that it has been in Unit 4, most of this stuff in Unit 3 has been shifted up into another part of the rubric. So the line that we just looked at before, a lot of that language is borrowed there in consideration of the topic, the evidence that we're using. So I think they've shifted it over and allowed a little bit more broader scope when you're using your evidence, but ultimately we're looking at your response full stop, including your evidence in Unit 4 being responding to the prompt. So in this fourth section of the presentation, we are going to be looking at how you should be analyzing your text and the things that VCAA is really looking for. So this was pretty much what we were looking at before, right? In the rubric and the outcomes, right? So the dynamics of the text, character motivations, tensions in relationships, function of setting, how does the setting build upon our ideas of blah, blah, blah. The complexities of the plot, the role of point of view, there is a difference between third and first person in the ways in which the audience connects, understands certain characters, etc. Is there a difference between certain characters in their point of view chapters, if there is any differences? Some texts are just solely one point of view, and that's fine. What is that point of view doing? And then this is pretty much word for word for what VCAA was saying before in that rubric, all right? So the explicit and implicit, how these different contexts and values shape meaning and our understanding of the text, values, how are they conveyed, the impact of the way it is written essentially on the text, and how the way it's written shapes our understanding, okay? So we're going to go through an example, okay? We're going to go through an example that is not on the VCAA list because I don't want to make it unfair to groups of Year 12s, okay? I want to make it so that everyone can understand it and you don't have to read a specific text to be able to do this. So what did I do instead? Shrek. My assumption is the majority of you have watched Shrek. Hopefully that is the case. If you have not watched Shrek, this probably next section won't make much sense to you. But surely you've seen enough online to be able to know some stuff about Shrek, the movie. We're going to be focusing on Shrek 1, okay? And you will be able to understand and connect the stuff from Shrek to the different criteria that VCAA are looking for. All right? Now, word of warning. There is so much that goes on in Shrek. I'm mostly focusing on the main character of Shrek in most of these things, right? There's a million things to be said about all of them. So if we look at character motivations, right, that Vika was talking about and the dynamics of the text, at the beginning of the movie, Shrek is very much motivated by wanting a solitary life. He wants to be left alone, okay? However, as the text progresses, he ends up being motivated by the desire to protect his loved ones, okay? He is then able to accept the love that they give and feels more deserving of it, okay? So he goes through a little journey internally in terms of his motivations, and that is always the case. Characters really stay static, right? Let's look at the tensions in his relationship. We've got Shrek and Fiona. Shrek, self-imposed isolation, versus Fiona's romantic tendencies, okay? He wants to be left alone. Fiona is quite a romantic gal, you know? So this creates not tension in the sense that, you know, arguments and all, but it creates some sort of a tension because there is sort of a mismatch going on between these two characters. Let's talk about the function of settings briefly. So Duloc, Lord Farquaad's kingdom, bless him, is driven by this obsession with everything being clean, ordered, perfect, right? This is relaying to us that Lord Farquaad, the setting, emphasizes and prioritizes superficiality, how things look, rather than authenticity. Because a real, say, let's use a home example, right? A real proper homey home, things are a little bit out of place, you know? Someone left their books on the bench, someone left their glasses over there. If everything's neat, perfect, and everything's perfect in order all the time, we kind of get a bit freaked out, you know? That's the same thing in here. Lord Farquaad's kingdom is obsessed with this absolute perfection and superficiality. This juxtaposes or contrasts with Shrek's swamp, okay, which is not quite clean, not as ordered, and not as perfect. However, it is authentic and genuine, all right? So we've got these two clashing settings progressing our plot along, all right? So let's talk about complexities of the plot. At a glance, most children's childhood fairy tale movies seem simple. It's not, though. It is actually quite complex. It completely subverts typical fairy tale tropes. Shrek does in particular, right? So everything what you would expect from a fairy tale, it kind of does the opposite. And that's kind of what makes it one of the best childhood movies there is. It is not a typical princess and hero story. Look at our hero walking out of his swamp. Not what you typically would expect from a hero, right? Let's look at the point of view, right? Shrek's point of view. It allows us to sympathize with a character who at first appears quite unlikable, right? If we weren't seeing the inner workings of Shrek, right, and we met him for maybe 10 minutes at the beginning of the movie through, say, Donkey's point of view, Shrek would be a bit of a meanie, okay? We wouldn't really like him. But because we're seeing him from his point of view, we are able to build some of that sympathy and connection and help us, the audience, understand him and his motivations and what he cares about and his values a little bit better. Let's look at the explicit versus implicit ideas that are in this text. So, explicit, it's a movie about acceptance. Love who you are, you know, accept how you are. Ogres, in this case. However, implicitly, it is a bit of a critique of the fairy tale formula. A little bit more implicitly than the acceptance of oneself. Okay, they don't have to be so implicit that you can't see it. Like, obviously, if we think a little bit hard about Shrek, we can kind of see that it's making fun of fairy tales, right? But the love and acceptance part is probably the thing that hits us first, right? By the time we finish that movie, oh, what a lovely movie about accepting oneself. That's the first thing, right? Now we peel it back and go back and back and back and go, what else is it saying behind all that? Yep, critique of the fairy tale formula. Oh yes, so we've got love and happiness coming from embracing individuality, breaking societal norms, all of those things together adding to this subversion of the fairy tale formula. Let's talk about historical context, social and cultural values, and how it's shaping our meaning as readers. So this is made in the 21st century. Okay, there is a lot more body positivity due to this movement of more body positive people. In this case, yes, we are talking about cartoons with not barely any humans. I completely understand that. However, these values are sort of being implied through these different creatures that we're seeing on our screen. We are having that shift from external beauty being the number one thing to internal beauty being absolute driver of, a person's genuineness. We've also got the challenging of traditional notions of romantic relationships, right? That is all going on. 21st century values. If we look at a lot of the movies during this time, there is some of that going on in a lot of the other ones as well, versus if this was made in the 50s, Okay, how are the values in a text conveyed? We've got some of these values coming through in Shrek's character arc, okay? We've got his arc of learning to love himself, showing this value of it is beautiful and wonderful and difficult at times, but well worth loving and accepting oneself, okay? We've also got humor being used to show us this value of anti-conformity and individuality, okay? It is allowing these values to become more accessible and palatable, right? Humor used by a lot of characters, but namely Shrek. Then we talk about the way that it is written, filmed in this case, and how these different things of shape meaning. So we've got the typical structure of a text called the hero's journey, okay? It is found in so many different texts out there in the world for the longest period of time, right? This is a structure that has existed since ancient times, okay? This is a subversion of it. The hero's journey is quite clunky in comparison to the way which it's presented in other texts. The hero in this case is an ogre, not a handsome man. This is an ogre, okay? That is odd for the hero's journey. We are talking about a character who is an everyday person, not someone that's been blessed by the gods, not someone that has a divine parent. None of that is going on in this case, okay? This is your everyday representation. It is also a parody, multiple fairy tales. We've got so many in this movie referenced, and it's sort of making fun of them to an extent. And this links to that critique of stereotypical fairy tale tropes that we were talking about before. So when it comes to analysis, here are my top tips. What and how. Remember to not only look for what the text says, but how it's being said. Look for structures that reveal the messages, okay? A lot of students tend to rely on the what, okay? Look for how those things are doing what you're saying they're doing, okay? The movie reveals that accepting oneself is highly important, or it's a difficult journey. Okay, cool. Yes, that's true. That message is very true. How do we find that? How do we learn that message? How is that being conveyed? How does it change throughout the thing? For example, resistance at the beginning from Shrek. He's like, I want to be left alone. Leave me alone. I don't want this. I don't want that. Then as we move along and he starts being accepted and loved by other characters and embraced by other characters, and he starts stepping out of his comfort zone, he starts realizing, hang on a minute, I do feel this acceptance and love. And maybe I do deserve it. Then tip number 2, implied meanings. So there are really obvious things. As I was saying before, there are very obvious things that texts tend to say. All right? That is fine. But probably the other thousands of students studying your text are most likely going to bring those things up too. So let's go a couple of steps further and analyze some of those more subtle and nuanced messages that are going on behind that first obvious one. I'm not saying ignore the first obvious one. I'm not saying never write about the obvious one. I'm saying in addition to the obvious stuff, what else can we find? What else is the text saying to us? And lastly, trust your instincts. You are a reader/viewer also. Think about how things are affecting you and really think about that. Why did this scene make me feel sad? What were the things going on? Am I feeling sympathy for the character? How have I built sympathy for this character? What did I find out, how is it being relayed to me? And that made me feel sympathy for this character. All right? And explore why you feel that way, essentially. Next section. Writing your essays. So what and how am I being asked to write? Right? This is again looking at VCAA's outlines, right? According to VCAA. So they want you to plan, construct, and edit analytical writing that responds to topics, develops and maintains, sustains ideas throughout, explores and refines organizational structure appropriate to analytical writing, shows your knowledge of the text, and uses evidence from the text to support your ideas and your analysis. And finally, you're demonstrating your understanding of purpose, audience, and context in your writing. Let's talk about the structure of a paragraph, guys. Okay. This, to preface, is my opinion after years of tutoring and uni and high school, all of that stuff, okay? VCAA do not specify, I want to make this super clear, okay, I'm going to come closer. VCAA do not specify a specific structure to your paragraphs and essays that you have to do in order to score well. Okay? There are things where they recommend in the examiner's report, this actually worked really well, this worked well for this student, this worked well because of this, and this. Sure, that stuff exists, but there is not a specific formula that VCAA have said, if you follow this exactly, you are guaranteed a score. Okay? Or this is the only way you can do it. There are variations that they allow for. Okay? So, the key components of a paragraph, generally speaking, is a topic sentence, a context statement, sub-arguments, as I like to call them, which include evidence, text structures and quotes. Let's not forget text structures. Includes analysis and authorial intent, a couple of rounds of that sub-argument, and then in a second, your linking sentence. We're going to go through what these things mean. So if you're not quite sure, don't panic. We're going to go through it. So let's look at this prompt. Okay, we're not going to break this one down. We'll break down another one soon. The film Shrek reveals that true love is not about perfection, but about embracing imperfections. Do you agree? Now, remember, we are looking at a paragraph, so we're not doing a contention right now. We are not responding to this prompt wholly and fully in a contention. We are looking at one aspect of it to write in a paragraph existing within a whole essay. So, our topic sentence. The typical things that a topic sentence would need to include. It needs to be argumentative. All right? Not something like, the film Shrek shows love. Not argumentative. That's a fact. All right? Or, Shrek is an ogre. Fact. Needs to be an argument. It needs to have an angle that you are pushing for. Right? It needs to be connected to the prompt. That's quite obvious, you would think, actually, but it's not. A lot of students will just respond quite broadly and think, yeah, that's fine because, you know, it's broad enough that it will do. No. Okay? If I'm writing, even if it's argumentative, and I'm not specifically talking about the language that's in the prompt, and I'm not specifically responding to that, it's sort of a non-answer, even if it is about Shrek. And finally, reference to the text, okay? This one is sort of the one that you can get away with that. If you forget to include it, that's fine, all right? Because we all know what you're writing about in that essay, that's fine. In terms of what text you're responding to, let me clarify. The argument and your connection to the prompt have to be the most obvious ones because we're not in your head, okay? We can't guess what you were wanting to say in this paragraph. Reference to the text makes for a cleaner topic sentence, but if you forget to include the word Shrek, we still know you're responding to Shrek because you've been asked to write about Shrek. Does that make sense? Reference to the text can also be the authors or the directors, which is what we have in this example. Adamson and Jensen, the directors, contend that to truly love, one must embrace and accept their imperfections. All right, so let's have a quick look again. Adamson and Jensen is our reference to the text. The argumentative part is the contend that blah, that to blah, one must blah and blah. All right. Connection to the prompt, we've got truly love. So reveals that true love is not about imperfection. So we've taken an angle that it's not just about truly loving another person, it's about also truly loving yourself. Okay, that is one aspect of this prompt, that we are looking at in this paragraph. And one must embrace and accept their own imperfections. We've got embrace and imperfections here from the prompt. There, there, there. Okay. So let's talk about the context statement. This is the somewhat optional one. It kind of depends. I've seen students do well in their writing without it. I've seen others do better with it. It depends on you and your writing. This essentially helps you to transition from your topic sentence to your first round of evidence and analysis, because sometimes it can be quite jarring to go from that topic sentence to bam, here's my evidence, here's this, here's that, here's that. That can be a lot, all right? So it really depends on your writing style. Okay, for example, Shrek displays this tension through Shrek and Fiona's developing romantic relationship. This is broad. I'm not giving any evidence per se here. I'm hinting at where I'm going. I'm making my scope a little bit smaller about where I'm going to go in my evidence and stuff. But this itself wouldn't be sufficient as evidence per se. And it's not very deeply analytical either. It's sort of just pushing us along the way. It's just giving us some context of where we're going. Okay. Let's talk about sub-argument rounds. I personally call them sub-argument rounds. I'm not sure if other people do. So your school, your tutor, your study guide company that you love may and probably call these different things. All right. I like calling them sub-argument rounds. Okay. So evidence, analysis, authorial intent. Let's get into it. So let's go back here for a moment. Evidence. I want to reiterate, evidence is not just quotes, people. It is not just quotes. It is text structures as well. Okay. It is using literary devices. It is using structure of the text. All of those different things in the ways in which it's written, plus quotes. All right. They can be used together. That's fine. People tend to rely on quotes because they feel more comfortable with it. I understand it. Make sure we're including text structures too. And then our analysis, analyzing the evidence. Essentially, analysis is, what does this evidence have to do with my point? What does it have to do with my point? Connect the two. And then authorial/directorial intent. What was the author, the creator, I will say to be broad, the creator doing when they included certain things? What were they trying to convey to us? All right, views and values. Let's get into it. So Adamson and Jensen utilize a sequence of scenes whereby Shrek is creating and posting signs for people to beware that an ogre lives at his swamp. Evidence. This sequencing analysis reveals the lengths Shrek goes to in order to maintain a life of isolation, utilizing his identity as an ogre as a deterrent for connection with others. Are you with me so far? All right. Our evidence was the sequencing of scenes, and you need to be specific, because if we just said sequencing of scenes, whereby Shrek warns others about his presence, yeah, that's fine. Be a little bit more specific. He's creating and posting signs for people to be aware that he, an ogre, lives at this swamp. That is relevant because he's using that to be isolated from other people. Okay, so that is the evidence part, and then we say what that reveals. Remember, it is about truly loving oneself. To be able to truly love oneself, we must embrace our own imperfections. All right, so he's using this imperfection of his ogre identity as a deterrent for connection with other people. Okay. Continuing on with the authorial, in this case, directorial intent. Thus, the directors contend that at times people's imperfections can drive people to sever the potential for connection and therefore ultimately restricting the opportunity for true love. Understood? So we're talking about what happens when some people, in this case Shrek, use these imperfections as a means to stop them from even having the opportunity for connecting to another person, let alone truly loving them. Okay, so he's using these things as a way to justify a distance from other people, to not have love. That's what's going on in these 3 steps, okay? Now, linking sentence. This summarizes your paragraph's argument and links it back to the prompt. It is the bow, basically, on the gift. The gift is the bulk. The gift is what we really want at the end of the day, but the bow is a nice touch, right? The bow makes it complete, makes it feel complete, makes it read completed. So don't take that as, oh, I can skip it and my essay will still be done. No, include it, but it's the bow. this is not a link to the next paragraph. I've had a lot of students say to me, oh, the linking sentence is a link to the next paragraph. No, no, no. That is something that was taught in primary school, but this is not something to be used in textual analysis, okay? When it comes to stuff like argument analysis, and we're talking about, say, your oral, okay? You can use that to transition to the next part, sure, but not in this. In text response, that's not what you're doing. You are linking back to the prompt that you received, tying it up before moving on. So, thus, Shrek reveals that in order to develop the ability to truly love others, one has to firstly learn how to love their own imperfections. Let's see this all together. I'm going to get you to have a read of this. I am going to move myself out of the way so you can have a quick read and you can pause, all right? Okay, should have read it by now. Pause it if you didn't. Go back. All right, let's compare this to what we were talking about before from VCAA, all right? Plan, construct, and edit analytical writing that responds to a set topic. We did that. Develops and sustains ideas. Did that to some extent. In a full essay, you're going to be doing that continuously. In a paragraph, you're doing a few rounds of that sub-argument stuff, right? So this part and this part, building our overall paragraph idea. And all those paragraphs together are building our contention and our response to the prompt. And then we've got explores and refines organizational structure, appropriate to analytical writing. We have got that organized structure of a paragraph that we were talking about before that is slowly building upon each other. Okay. Knowledge of the text has been demonstrated. We've got key evidence in there to support what our claims, our ideas and our analysis. We have got an understanding of the purpose, audience, and context of the text. Okay, continuing on, we are going to look at breaking down a prompt. So this is a different one, all right? So to what extent does the film Shrek subvert traditional fairy tale tropes? If you're hearing that and going, oh my goodness, what is that asking me? Just wait a moment. We're going to get into it. So this is what I like to do, all right, when I look at a prompt. I like going with the first instincts of let's work out what exactly is being asked of me. And especially this is really good for situations where you are unsure of what you're being asked as well. With time, you'll be able to get faster and faster at this because they tend to borrow a lot of similar phrasing. So after a little while, you should be quite comfortable with it. But in the initial stages, take your time, right? So the first thing, when I see to what extent, I am translating that to where do we sit on the spectrum between subverting and embracing? Subverting, embracing. Where do we sit? Where does this movie sit? Okay, I'll give you a hint. It never sits right here, never sits right here, and it never sits bang here. We're usually in between, leaning towards one more than the other. Next one, what does subvert mean? Subvert essentially is turns it on its head, changes, undermines it. It goes against traditional fairy tale tropes. And then when we hear the traditional fairy tale tropes, that is our parameters. That's our borders of what we're allowed to explore, right? Anything beyond traditional fairy tale tropes is starting to go to an irrelevant path, all right? So we're looking at tropes specifically found and used in fairy tales. Now, you may be thinking, oh my goodness, there's only so many I can think of. That's fine. If you were studying this at school, you would have gone through this in great detail. You would know these things. So whatever equivalent you have in your text, you would have gone through them quite extensively at school, with your tutor, with your mates, etc. So what I like to do is to write a mostly agree, mostly disagree list. What things do I think of that work with the mostly agree, right? I haven't decided which side I've picked yet, which mostly side I mean. So I'm not sure at this stage which one I would pick. So I'm just going to create my little list, right? So I mostly agree. We've got the not typical hero, which we've spoken about like 50 times. Not typical princess. She's not just a damsel in distress. Okay, so she's not a typical princess in the fact that she's also an ogre, but she's also not the, oh no, come save me, I can't do anything on my own. Okay, we've got a lot of focus on self-acceptance rather than this, real external standards of beauty. We're not talking about characters that are cursed with this, real ugliness, and the happy ending is them being beautiful once again. That's not what's happening. The beauty in this movie and in these characters is very internal, not external, right? They're humanly complex, okay? A lot of times in fairy tales, we've got very 2D characters. The angry one, the moody one, the pretty one, the strong one, the this one, that one. Blah. These are not just one thing. These characters are a multitude of complex things altogether. Let's think about it, however. This is that mostly you disagree. There is a reliance on love between individuals to transform circumstances. Okay, that is pretty stereotypical traditional fairy tale trope. Okay, oh no, these characters fell in love and their whole lives become brighter, and this and happens and that happens, and they're free and they're happy now, and this and this and that and that. There is still that. There is often in this movie a self-acceptance is first brought on by acceptance from others. So we're not really seeing anything straying too far away in fairy tale tropes where others come around, band together, accept this person first, then they feel that they have the ability to accept themselves. These aren't bad things in any way, by the way. So when I'm looking at this, I've got quite a few more in the mostly agree than I do the however, so I'm probably going to be leaning towards mostly agree. So let's change the examples that we gave here and put them into a bit more of a succinct sentence. So we've got atypical relationships in love. So not typical hero, not typical princess, being in love with each other. And then we've put in the fact that she's not a damsel, not simply a damsel, also there. Donkey and dragons, another really great example. And we've also got flawed protagonists. Protagonists that are inherently flawed as people, as characters. Right? But that doesn't make them unlikable, perhaps. It doesn't. It makes them more relatable. So they're humanly complex self-acceptance rather than the focus on external standards of beauty. However, love and acceptance from others, spurring transformation, reliance on love between individuals, transforming circumstances, and it's often self-acceptance comes from others' acceptance first. So those 3 dot points that we're seeing here, this would form one paragraph, another paragraph, another paragraph, right? That process becomes easier and easier with time and practice. The first time I would have done this when I was back in high school, it wouldn't have been this easy. It was not this easy. It's been with time and really understanding and knowing a text and sort of knowing the little hints of what's going on in the prompt. That comes with practice, basically. All right, let's talk about the conclusion. What is a conclusion, and is it that important? So, yes, it is important, but not as much as you think. So I encourage you to read examiners' reports. There's a lot of little lovely tidbits of information in there. And one of the things that was said was the fact that your conclusion will only give you more marks if it takes your point that bit further. Okay. So if it does a really nice consideration of the implications right at the end. I'm not saying add in new evidence and all that stuff. No. I'm not doing that in conclusions. We're saying, okay, this is our contention. And then do you remember how we said the implications of a topic? Implications work really well in your conclusion. If you're not going and taking those steps, that's fine. You're not going to lose marks because that's not how English works. But you're probably not going to gain any because of that conclusion. All right, have a look at the 2023 examiner's report. There is a fantastic example in there, writing in response to the erratics. So, conclusions should tie up the argument you've been making, outline overall messaging to the audience/audiences, and this is what the part that I was saying before that can afford you more marks, all right? What is the overall thing that we as the audience are taking? We as the audience, as if there can be multiple audiences. What are we taking away from this text? And obviously connect that to the topic. In this case, we could say ultimately Adamson and Jensen remind the youth of the early 21st century that their imperfections are a part of the beauty of their authentic selves. That is connecting to the audience, and that is taking a little bit one step further. This was in response to that other prompt about true love. Actually, it would probably fit in both, to be honest. All right, let's talk about top tips when it comes to writing. First one, understand all components, please. The prompt is a full sentence. Do not pick and choose what you're going to talk about. That will not afford you very many marks, and it will read incomplete. So make sure you are reading it properly and responding to all aspects of it. Answer the prompt. Yeah, that sounds super obvious, but it clearly is not obvious enough. Don't pick the part that you love and you know and go, yep, that's it. That's what I'm going to write about. No. Each part of the sentence that is the prompt work with one another. All right, so we can't just pluck something out and say that's it. We need to see the way in which it works with the other elements of that same prompt and answer it fully and wholly. The final tip, however, not disagree. Most students will do a lean towards agree, right? Most will. That's not a problem. That's fine. But sometimes they'll do their third body paragraph as a complete disagree, right? For example, oh yes, Shrek does subvert fairy tale tropes, traditional fairy tale tropes. They'll do that for 2 paragraphs. And the third one, Shrek doesn't actually. It doesn't subvert it. Do not go against what you've just spent the entire 2/3 of your essay writing. Okay? It can be a however. What that means is Shrek mostly subverts traditional fairy tale tropes. However, it does accept some, such as blah. It does accept the least damaging ones, whatever your opinion is about it. Final section, the VCAA rubric. So, what is VCAA looking for in the exam? So, when it comes to the SAC, as I said earlier, schools can use the rubric provided by VCAA and they can adapt it, or they can keep it completely the same, or they can make their own. Schools are designing SACs specifically to cater to their cohort. I will say it again. VCAA have provided outcomes and things that VCAA wants to be assessed, skills basically, that they want to be assessed. And your school has the ability to create the SAC that fits the assessment of those skills, but also matches the cohort. That is why you'll talk to your mate from that blah, blah, blah school and you're like, hang on a minute, we're both studying the exact same text. Why are they doing it this way? Why are we doing it this way? SACs for the same unit, for the same area of study, for the same text between schools will likely have a difference. Even if it's not the exact SAC itself, it could be in the rubric, could be in something that they've taught. There are differences across schools. Teachers at the same schools will probably teach things very differently, okay? Let alone at different schools. So calm your farm if you hear that there is a difference somewhere else. That is going to happen. Exam, however, there is one rubric that the examiners use to mark the responses for all Victorian students sitting the exam. That's roughly 40,000 of you each year. Let's go into it. So it's all on the right side. I'm going to make myself just a little bit smaller. You are not expected to read this all like this right now. We are going to go through it. So there are 3 components that are being assessed. The 3 dot points in each row. Each row is a different number or groupings of numbers, because you can see that there is a 9 and 10 and a 1 and 2. So the 3 components that are being assessed. 1, your understanding of the text. 2, your response to the prompt. 3, how you write. Right? How well you understand the text, how well you respond to the prompt, how well you write about it. So let's talk about the first component, understanding the text. So within that first dot point, within understanding the text, there are another 3 components. Your knowledge of the text, your understanding of the ideas, concerns, and values of the text, and your understanding of the language and structure used in the text. All right? Bear with me. I've color-coded it. It's the first row of every single row It's the first row, okay? Let's go through. So we've got, these are the descriptors, okay? The things I've highlighted: close and perceptive reading, thoughtful reading, detailed knowledge, clear knowledge. That's what we're going to look at here, all right? Close and perceptive. I've gone through and basically try to expand on what the differences are, because I've had a lot of students being like, hey, I don't understand what these words, like I know what these words mean, but what does the actual difference of these words look like on paper? All right, now we haven't gone that far to go to on the paper, but hopefully these sort of elaborations can help you understand why there is even a difference. So close and perceptive reading, if you're doing close and perceptive reading, okay, you're 9 and 10 scoring, you are noticing the little details, okay? You have a really strong awareness of the text. You are interpreting the text, okay? You are noticing the things that other students aren't, or most students aren't. Thoughtful, right? If you consider this description for your mate, oh, this person's really thoughtful. They are considering you. They are contemplating, what would they like for their birthday? What would they like for this surprise? You know, they're reflecting all their memories with you and going, oh, what should we do? Okay, yeah, I remember how happy they were when this happened. Okay, that is what's happening to the text. Right? You are carefully considering and reflecting on all components of it. Detailed, you know a lot about it. Right? You know a lot about it. That's fantastic. It tends to be a little bit more factual and objective versus the first from 8 to 10. 8 to 10 tends to lean to a little bit more of interpretive with a basis in the text, please. But detailed, which is number 7, tends to be a little bit more like this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened, and I can tell you 50, maybe 100 other things that happened. You just know a lot about it. Clear, accurate, explicit information. Right? Again, a bit more factual. Adequate, you know enough. There is some depth there. Right? Could be better, but you know some. Basic, I feel like I don't need to expand on basic. Right? Most students that get stuck between the differences is 8 to 10. Okay. Thoughtful friend, perceptive friend. Thoughtful friend is the one that remembers a year ago that you said, I love pink flowers. But perceptive friend is the one that noticed you at the flower shop only picking up pink flowers and you didn't have to say anything. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Second aspect to the first component. So this is the understanding the text, ideas, concerns, and values. So considering the complexities, this is you weighing up, right? So you're getting all these mixed messages from a text because nothing is ever 100% taking us in one direction, right? There are conflicting things going on. We're wading through the waters trying to work out what they're trying to tell us. You are weighing up the competing and nuanced, complex, layered components, and you are acknowledging the different ones, and you are taking a stance with evidence from the text. You are taking a stance, you know? You are looking at the competing things. Exploring, you're looking at the different options. You're thinking about them. You're forming opinions, okay? Some of its ideas, you're including some. You've mentioned a couple of things. Some elements, you've mentioned a couple of parts of them. Are we starting to notice the difference between these now, right? You've got some references, mentions them, limited references, barely includes it. So again, 8 to 10 is usually the ones that people get more stuck on. Exploring, you're going, okay, there's this option and that option and this option and that option. These are all the different ideas and these are the things, and you're sort of looking at them and thinking about them. But considering the complexities is you are taking more of a nuanced stance. I've thought about it and this is my opinion. I've thought about it. Here are the different aspects and this is what I am ultimately saying about it. Language and structure. This is your evidence. So again, we're still in understanding the text, okay? We're still in that first dot point. So the language and structure in the text. Explored. You are forming opinions about various pieces of evidence that are showing the logical connection between your stance and the text, okay? So your opinions that you have formed in the purple component just before is backed. Not just backed, but it is great options of evidence to back your point. So it's not just accurate, you are genuinely showing really strong pieces of evidence that work well between your stance and the text. A discussion. So you are logically connecting your stance with the text. That's great, right? Logically connecting your stance, 8. Exploring, the different options of evidence and how we got to our stance, and ultimately deciding on this stance with really strong evidence. Back down to 7. You appropriately acknowledge the aspects of language structure. Your opinions are connected to accurate pieces of evidence. So you're not just giving an opinion with nothing backing it, or you're not giving an opinion with something written. No. What you've included from the text is quite accurate. So then we've got 6, where you are including some evidence to back up your stances. Okay. Now, let's talk about the second component. This is the second dot point. This is your response to the prompt. We have just finished understanding the text. Now it's responding to the prompt. So we've got your literal understanding of the prompt and using the text as justification. Okay, so you've understood what is being asked of you and you've used the text to justify your response. So there's only 2 components of that second row. This is part 1 of this one because they don't all fit together. All right, so you have a clear understanding of the implications of the topic and you use an appropriate strategy for dealing with it. That is the 9 and 10, not the easiest to receive. Basically, this is you having a really strong understanding of the complexities presented by the prompt. All right. You are not shying away from the different components of that prompt. You are hitting it head on and you are solving it with strong and complex stance. Okay? Complex, strong stance that is backed by evidence, justifying it from the text. The other one, which is in the 8 category, is you're showing that you have understood some of the nuances by the prompt, right? You're acknowledging most of it. You are, somewhat facing it head on. But it's not quite as strong as the other 9 and 10s, okay? 9 and 10s is just, you've got a clear, solid understanding. There's no guesswork going on. It's very obvious. The other one is like, yep, okay, we're seeing it, sure. Moving down to 7 and below, you've understood all components of the prompt correctly, right? There's no misunderstandings. You've acknowledged it all. That is fine, and they're understood clearly. Number 6, you've moved through, developed a response, right? You've moved through and proven a stance throughout the essay, which is in line with the prompt. Okay, so you are giving a stance that's in line with the response, but not quite 100%, in response to all components of the prompt. 5, you show an understanding. Okay, you are displaying a stance that has a connection. Probably not the strongest connection, probably not a strong connection, full stop, but it's connected. Right? We see it. And then we jump to number 4. You display a stance that is somewhat connected to the prompt. See how if you understand all parts of the prompt and you respond to all parts to it, you've pretty much hit number 7 straight away. All right, so it's not too difficult to get up to this point if you're understanding it fully. Now, the second part of responding to the prompt is using the text as justification, right? This is the evidence stuff. So we've got number 9 and 10. You're exploring the complexity of the text. So you use the text to justify your stance. You don't just say a stance and go, here's some evidence to back it. No. You have got a complex stance that has come out of the text. Number 8, you use the text to justify your stance. So in this case, it is the main difference is the complexity of your stance and how much evidence you use to back that. Okay, so exploring its complexity, the stance's complexity from the text, and your stance is just being explored in level 8. Level 7. So in level 7 now, so we are talking about using evidence throughout the text, to back up your point throughout. You are consistently using evidence and it does back up. It's not irrelevant, it is appropriate. Pretty good. Then the next one is you use evidence from the text that backs up your point. Cool. It's maybe not the strongest, it's maybe not as regular as it needs to be, but it is appropriate. And then finally, we've got just mentioning evidence from the text. So, you're talking about one character and you chuck in something about another character because that's the only quote you remember. It's one of those situations, right? Let's look at the final component of the rubric. This is talking about your writing skills. So, how organized your piece is and your language and communication, your writing essentially, all right? So, let's talk about organization of the piece. This one is where we start getting into some fancier words. So, a cogent, controlled, and well-substantiated discussion. It is convincing, it is organized, and it is well supported. Everything is logically sound, okay? It is said with a strong purpose. That is a big point. There's not a huge amount of fluff in a 9 and 10. Every sentence, majority of the sentences are purposeful. They are doing something in helping you respond to the prompt accurately and well. All right? Moving to level 8, it is a thorough, well-supported, and logical discussion. Okay? Lots of detail going on. It is well-backed. It makes sense, but maybe it's not as convincing. Maybe it's not as organized as the previous one. Okay? Everything in this second one, in level 8, these components fit well together. Maybe it's not so purposeful, but they fit. 7, essay builds on itself in a structured way, right? So we are moving through your argument throughout the whole thing. We are seeing the logical development. It's organized. It makes sense. Generally organized, good amount of structure. Right? There's logical paths between the structure of your essay. We're seeing how you're jumping from some stuff to stuff, but it's probably not as consistent and it's probably not as clear cut as some of the other parts. And then finally, there is some structure to your essay. There is perhaps an introduction, a paragraph, somewhat of a paragraph. There is connection between your sentences, etc. Then language and communication. This is basically the way in which you write your piece, the words you use. Pretty obvious, that one. So precise and expressive. You are using accurate language, okay? When we say expressive, make me feel something in response to your piece. I don't mean like make me cry. I mean say it in a way that I'm impacted by your argument in the words that you use. Okay? Make me think, whoa, that was a beautiful way of saying this situation, describing that, you know? It is rich writing. There is a lot of attention given to the specificity and impact of your word choices. Usually students hitting the 9 and 10s in this category are quite good at writing anyhow, and they just may get better in year 12. So they're not quite thinking all the time, what word. They're probably doing it instinctively by the time they hit year 12. Not saying that you can't build that up, you can, but sometimes that can also take up a lot of time if it's not coming naturally. Fluent and confident language, it's smooth. You know, it's natural. I'm not feeling clunkiness when I'm reading. You sound confident when you're writing, but maybe it's not as rich. Maybe it's not as impactful, right? Level 7, it is specific, okay? What you mean, what you're thinking is relayed. It's accurate and it's appropriate. And then as we start going further down, it becomes a little bit more obvious, mostly accurate, mostly appropriate, and that your communication is adequate. When we say it's adequate, I can understand what you're saying. Your meaning is there, maybe not the clearest, but it's there. I can find it. All right, let's talk about some top tips to do with writing. Okay, so holistic marking, rubric, sorry, is what I was trying to say. Holistic marking. VCAA have said a lot of times they consider all the factors of the rubric when deciding on your mark. So it's not quite so, okay, well, they've got a little bit in the 7, they've got a little bit in this 8, and this and this and this. So if I add it up and use a calculator and divide by 3, it's not like that. Okay, it is not using formulas like that. It's a general sort of how well have they done in all these areas in combination. Additionally, they don't outline that one dot point has more impact than others. In this case, what I'm trying to ultimately say is you should put effort in all the elements, not just one. Moving on to the next tip, your evidence. Try to find evidence that shows complexity. Try to find the nitty gritty and understand it really well, okay? Okay, comparison game. Unfortunately, VCE is a comparison game, and so is the exam. So sometimes you think, why did that person get a 10 and I got a 9? We're in the same row of the rubric. Unfortunately, it could just mean that person wrote slightly better. That person said it slightly more expressively or richly. That person used a couple of pieces of evidence that are less used than what you did. It is unfortunate, but it is a comparison game. So you just focus on trying your best. This also does mean that in your cohort, you may be getting consistent 7s, but when you get compared to a very large group of people, roughly 40,000, perhaps we're shifting maybe to a 6 or maybe to an 8. Okay? So that is all. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. Let me know in the comments. Let me know if this has been helpful. Hopefully I didn't yap so hard that you muted me the whole time and just looked at the slides. So feel free to leave a comment or shoot me an email at eleni@learningloft.com.au. I also have a TikTok at tutor.eleni. Please give us a like and subscribe. It would mean the world to me. So to be able to get these videos out to more and more students to help make education and English specifically a little bit more accessible to all students. So please share it with your friends. Check out our bio in the link tree in the bio if you are interested in getting English tutoring by one of the tutors at Learning Loft Education. Bye, good luck.